So a large part of voting in the elections that come up is also to know what each party promises to achieve if they were to come to power. Now, that is the party manifesto. The Congress party has released its manifesto yesterday. We're waiting for the BJP's manifesto, which is likely to come in the next few days. And as we get more and more manifestos from parties, we'll break them down here and tell you what are the most important things that are being promised by these parties. Now, the Congress's manifesto is being called the Nyay Patra. It's a 48-page document that was released, and its driving force is 25 guarantees that it's giving. That were largely declared during the Bharat Jodo Yatra of Rahul Gandhi. Interestingly, Rahul Gandhi is on the front page, along with Mallikarjun Kharge, sort of suggesting that he remains the face of the party. Sonia Gandhi, though, is not on the front page of the manifesto. Her photograph is not on the front page. It's, inside on the back pages, suggesting that, she's sort of taking a step back from leadership of that party. But let's talk about the guarantees, or what they're calling the pillars of justice, that are being promised to women, to youth, to farmers, to the labor force, and for equal participation. Now, a couple of interesting things that I noticed, and this is from my perspective of what I think is interesting in this manifesto. First of all, it talks about, for me, doubling India's GDP in the 10 years starting now. And back of the envelope calculation suggests that it should be growing at about 7-ish, a little over 7% in order to achieve that, which means that the Congress there is banking on the kind of policies that the Manmohan Singh government sort of championed, and they're criticizing the Modi government for not being able to continue that growth. But let's remember also there was COVID during the Modi government, and that sort of dipped our growth quite a bit. Now, it talks about maintaining a stable tax regime, and it also talks about limiting the cess that the union government puts to take revenue away from the states. Now, let me take a quick detour to explain what that is. There is a law in the country that says that for every rupee that the union government actually collects as tax, they have to send a certain amount, to share a certain amount with state governments. So what this union government was doing in budget, in the back pages, was increasing the cess, saying, okay, we're going to add a little more for highways, we're going to add a little more for education, and that, based on the law, is cess they don't have to share with the states. So also, it mentions, the Congress's manifesto mentions a direct tax regime. Now, this was Chidambaram's baby, also suggesting that Mr. Chidambaram, who chaired the committee that wrote this manifesto, will also be playing a very large role. He was part of the team that was part of that press conference on the launch of the manifesto. Now, it interestingly also talks about reaffirming the freedoms that are guaranteed in the Constitution. So it talks about living without fear, guaranteeing every single citizen the right to wear what you want, to eat what you want, to believe what you want, to assemble freely, which basically means to allow you to protest as much as you like. It has an entire section dedicated to the freedom of press, to protecting journalists, and to also insisting that owners who own media will have to then declare how much of that media they actually own. So these were interesting things to add. But I must tell you, manifestos get, released during every election. Very few of them are actually fully achieved, and a lot of times it's just sort of broad strokes, blue skies. In a perfect world, this is what we will achieve, but actually that rarely fully gets implemented. In fact, I must tell you, for me as a journalist, the BJP's manifestos from 2014, 2019, which said Uniform Civil Code, it said abrogation of 370, it said building of the Ram Mandir, seems actually like the manifesto that got really achieved because they checked all those boxes. Building infrastructure, they just really went after it. And I thought that was really a manifesto that they really stayed on top of. And so, it's interesting to see what the Congress is promising at this time. Now, they've also promised to investigate the electoral bond scheme, to investigate the PM Cares Fund, completely rejecting the one nation, one election concept, and they've sort of, under the section defending the Constitution, they've promised, to remove all the, what they're calling anti-people laws brought in by the BJP, relating to workers, farmers, criminal justice, environment, forest, and digital data. And they also talk about investigating the Rafael, the jet deal, Pegasus software, and demonetization. Now, in this 48-page document, They have not mentioned the Citizenship Amendment Act, or CAA, which they had so vehemently protested against. They have not talked about removing that. They haven't, for example, mentioned 370. They have not talked about removing that as well. But let me take you through the 10 big things that I noticed. First of all, and this is, of course, in an order that I have placed, legally recognizing civil unions among the LGBTQI plus community. Now, just giving you perspective, the Congress had maintained silence largely when equal marriage or same-sex marriage was before the Supreme Court. They had in fact been asked what their stand is, and they hadn't really fully made clear what their stand was at that time. CPIM, the ally of the Congress party, had promised legal recognition and protection of rights for civil union or same-sex partnerships. But it's interesting that the Congress has actually promised this, that they will make this a reality. The CPIM also had talked about an anti-discrimination bill. This is part of the manifesto. The second big thing is basic income. Now, basic income is something that the Congress party had actually talked about last time as well, and they're talking about it now also. What they've said this time, and they've sort of put it in the category of women's empowerment, they're calling it the Mahalakshmi scheme, but it's basic income. It basically says that for the poorest Indian families, there will be without questions, direct transfer of 1 lakh rupees per year. The poor will be identified among families at the bottom of the income pyramid, and the transfer will be to the oldest woman of that family. Now, it also says that it will enforce a national minimum wage at 400 rupees a day. Remember, the current daily wage is about 176, which is a level arrived at 2017. It's not still being fully implemented across the country. In fact, recently there was a story about tea workers who don't get minimum wage. So they're making that promise as well. Now, the other category that they talk about is youth, and they're talking about what they call Pehli Naukri Pakki, or your right to apprenticeship. Now, this is a new thing that they've added in this election. The right to apprenticeship, basically, they're saying that for every person who has a college degree or a diploma, there will be a 1-year apprenticeship, which will be done partly with government funding in private sector and in public sector, for which you will get 1 lakh rupees a year as stipend so that you can learn that skill. Now, again, you'll remember that for the Center of Monitoring Indian Economy keeps putting out sort of jobless data, and they had said for Indian youth between 20 and 24 years of age, 44% of them are unemployed. So this is obviously something that the Congress is targeting. Again, something that Rahul Gandhi talked about a lot during the Bharat Jodo Yatra. Now, the other big thing that's in this manifesto is caste. Now, the Congress party, again during Bharat Jodo Yatra, Rahul Gandhi kept talking about caste, and he kept talking about the fact that if elected, they will remove the 50% cap on reservations for scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, other backward classes, and they will also add a 10% reservation for economically weaker sections of society. This is something that the Prime Minister Modi came up with, and the BJP government has continued to sort of implement. So the Congress is holding on to that as well. They have not talked about removing that. They've also spent a lot of time. The first point, in fact, in their manifesto is about social justice and is about caste. I thought this was interesting. They've talked about a Rohit Vemula Act that will basically be about discrimination in educational institutions. They've talked about filling all of the vacancies for SC/ST jobs, supporting education for SC/ST. The parties, of course, this promise came after the Bihar government conducted that caste census and then passed a bill allowing 75% of the government jobs and education seats to be reserved for people from marginal castes. And this is, I think, part of that entire, idea. But I must remind you here, the Congress is part of the India Alliance, which has a lot of different alliance partners across the country. And there's no clarity on whether they all agree on this removal of 50% and what everybody's stand is and what that coalition government, will finally end up doing, if at all, right? So there's no clarity on what the entire sort of bloc thinks on any of these matters. The next thing, and this is really interesting, is Jammu and Kashmir, and this is crucial. Now, the Congress party has said that it will restore full statehood to Jammu and Kashmir and amend the 6th schedule of the constitution to include Ladakh. This is what Sonam Wangchuk is currently protesting for. The statehood question is in line with the Supreme Court's directions to the government. The BJP has not opposed statehood for Jammu and Kashmir. They've just said it would be done in a matter that is appropriate in the appropriate time. Ladakh, remember, during the beautification, became a union territory that doesn't have any sort of elected constituencies, any elected representatives. And Sonam Wangchuk's leadership right now is being acknowledged by the Congress. And you can watch this in this video that we had put up earlier, where basically they were asking for ways in which they can get special rights for Ladakh, to protect Ladakh at this current point. The manifesto has also promised statehood to Pondicherry, which is currently a union territory. There's an interesting, a bit about judiciary, where they've talked about, creating, two divisions of the Supreme Court, the Constitutional Court and the Court of Appeal in the Congress manifesto. And they've also said that all of the, the vacancies right now for judges will be filled in less than 3 years. The other point that's interesting for me is women's reservation. Now, remember, the women's reservation bill has been something that has been worked on for decades and decades and decades. It was Sonia Gandhi's sort of pet project, along with the right to information, when the UPA government was in power, but they weren't able to push it through Parliament. The BJP government has pushed it through Parliament, but based on the writing, it seems like it will only happen after 2029. What the Congress party is saying is that they will reserve 1/3 of the seats in state assemblies by 2025 and in the Lok Sabha by 2029. And they've sort of criticized the BJP's method of passing it through Parliament, saying that it was sinister because it does not commit a particular date. What it doesn't say is that how it will accommodate the SC, ST, OBC women within this reservation, and there's been no mention of that. The other thing, while reading that document, I found interesting was that it mentions that it will, starting 2025, reserve half of 50% of central government jobs for women. And it will ensure that more women are appointed as judges, as secretaries to government, as high-ranking police officers, as law officers, and directors of boards. And again, this is an interesting. There's no clarity on how it's going to get done, but to me, it's interesting that it got mentioned at all. The parties also promised to enact a law to make sure that bail is the rule and jail is the exception. Now, this has come up a lot because of the use of the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, the PMLA, which is what the ED functions on, to keep people in jail, UAPA, to sort of keep people in jail until evidence is presented against them. And it's being criticized that the current government uses that a lot. But one must mention that when the Congress was in power in UPA 1 or 2, they were not sharply different, in using laws to sort of shake people down. So again, a lot of the things that are promised in this manifesto, one might turn around and say, when you were in power for 10 full years, you did nothing about it. The Congress has also said that it will abolish the Agnipath scheme and return to normal recruitment process of the Army, Navy, and Air Force. Now, again, this would be welcomed by a large group of people, but the reason why the current government looked at the Agnipath scheme, whether it was popular or not, because the wage bill was becoming really expensive on government, and that is again something the Congress will have to reconcile if this is something they're going to junk. The other thing they want to junk is the idea of one nation, one election. Now, big chunk again that's interesting to me is farmer rights. They're calling it Kisan Nyay, and the manifesto promises legal guarantee of the minimum support price, and this is interesting, as recommended by the Swaminathan Committee report. Now, here's the thing. The Swaminathan Committee report was submitted in 2006. The Congress government sat on it for 10 years and did nothing. So, yes, it's great that you're promising now to implement that report, but you could have implemented it when you were in power and you didn't do anything. Remember, we've seen two massive protests. The farmer protests were to roll back the farm laws that the Modi government was looking at, but they were also demanding implementation of minimum support price. And recently, again, we saw farmers protesting because of that. Two more points. This manifesto talks about mining, and it talks about using mining to sort of boost the economy, like I talked about, doubling the GDP and things like that. Earlier in the previous UPA government, mining was not something they were pushing because of the environmental impact. At that point, Jairam Ramesh was environment minister. Mining approvals were not coming very quickly. It was difficult to mine, but now this manifesto talks about mining rare minerals. Rare minerals have been found in portions of India, including Ladakh, and they're important suddenly now to make batteries for electric vehicles. So for India and for around the world. So rare minerals could make India very rich, but also there is an environmental impact of rare minerals. So it does seem like the Congress seems to have changed its stance on mining like that it will encourage mining and mining of rare minerals. It also mentions sports, and it talks about enacting a legislation for the registration of sports federations as per the Olympic Charter, and also providing recourse for sports people against discrimination, sexual harassment, abuse, and wrongful termination. Now, this is obviously in response to the women wrestlers protesting against Brij Bhushan Sharan Singh of the BJP. So these were obviously big points that I noticed in the manifesto, and some things that were missing. Mention of CAA has not been mentioned at all, and that we thought was interesting because the Congress party was vehemently opposing CAA both inside and outside of Parliament, but it hasn't, sort of done that. You can, watch an entire breakdown of CAA and it's a criticism against it in this video we have done earlier. Second, Uniform Civil Code. There's no mention of Uniform Civil Code, but it does mention that it will uphold the rights of everyone to, practice a faith. And it talks about reforming personal laws in a way that all stakeholders are involved. Now, it doesn't talk about specifically what. It doesn't say Uniform Civil Code. It's kind of vague in its mention. If you don't go looking for it, it's unlikely you'll even find that mention. The BJP has termed the Congress manifesto a bundle of lies. It has said it's being brought out to create confusion among voters. And since the party, despite being in power for much of the history of independent India, has not fulfilled these promises, what is the point of it? This is what, the BJP has, criticized. There's another criticism from a BJP spokesperson who said there are two of the photographs that used in the environment page are actually not of India and of Thailand and of the United States, which is a criticism that they have come under. Now, if I were to look at this manifesto, my response is this. Like I said, lots of things could have been implemented in UPA 1 and 2. They have not been implemented. A lot of things are vague and not really clear as to how it will be implemented. The India bloc, and it's obvious at this point that there needs to be a cohesive sort of message from the India bloc. There isn't. We were hoping, what this does, of course, is give us clarity as to what the Congress party is thinking, because it's not just, we are not Narendra Modi. That's not their only pitch, but they have something to promise. But we don't know how this allies with the rest of the India bloc, and we'll be waiting for each of their manifestos to come. A couple of things that it says in this, seems like, I don't know how people will buy it. So, for example, in the external foreign affairs section, it says it will restore the image of India overseas that has been damaged by this government. I don't know how many voters are going to buy that argument that the image of India overseas has been damaged by the current Modi government, because their general belief is that the Modi government has done well to bolster India's image and India's standing in the global stage. The other thing, for example, it says in the infrastructure, building roads and bridges and, railways, it talks about the fact that BJP has been using government money to do all of these things. The Congress will bring back the PPP model, the public-private partnership model. And quite frankly, as a journalist, we remember clearly that the public-private partnership model was a hot mess because of the problems in corruption, the problems in those deals that we saw. And again, criticizing the Modi government on infrastructure might not be great, because it's generally accepted that they've done a good job when it comes to infrastructure. So these are the major points that I noticed from the Congress manifesto that I thought were interesting, good and bad. And as the BJP manifesto and other manifestos do come out, we'll bring you breakdowns of all of them. So leave me a comment and let me know if you believe that this manifesto is convincing to you. Would it influence the way you vote, or did you expect more or something different from the Congress party?